The next speaker will be Xinshi Chen from Georgia Tech. And Xinshi, if you could hear me, please start sharing your screen. You should already be made a co-host.
Okay, just a second.
Yeah, so yeah, sure. So during the same time, so Xinshi is a PhD student in Georgia Tech working with Professor Le Song, and she's broadly interested in mathematical principle deep learning and done very interesting work in deep learning, in the intersection of deep learning and reasoning method. And most recently, she won the Google PhD Research Fellowship. Congratulations, and please take it over from here. Thank you. So, Xinshi, did you find able to share the screen?
Yes, can you see the screen now?
Yes, very well. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks for the introduction. And today I'm going to talk about understanding deep architectures with reasoning layer. And this is the joint work with Yufei and Christoph from Oxford and Lee from Georgia Tech. And it has been recently accepted to NeurIPS 2020. Okay, nowadays there are more and more works that combine deep learning with traditional algorithms. For example, given the update steps of an iterative algorithm, we can unroll and truncate the algorithm and then use it as a specialized layer in the deep architecture. It seems that I forget to open the video. Would that be okay?
Okay. Yeah, you can try. Yeah, I can see the slides moving. Are you using a separate video, not embedded in the slides?
That's fine. That's fine.
Oh, you mean video camera yourself? I guess yeah. That doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So I will continue. And so in this paper, we consider the algorithm layer as a reasoning module in the deep architecture, which contains the algorithm steps to execute the prescribed operations. And this reasoning module is often stacked on top of a neural module, which can model more complex dependency and more complex information from the input. So the neural module and reasoning module together constitute a hybrid architecture, and this architecture can be trained end-to-end, and it has been successfully applied to many applications. For example, in SetNet, it has a neural module that processes the input image and a reasoning module which contains a set solver. By including the set solver as the reasoning module, this hybrid architecture can execute logic inference and solves more sophisticated problems such as visual Sudoku. Another example is the RNA secondary structure prediction problem. So RNA secondary structure prediction is the problem which wants to predict the structure of an RNA sequence. So the input is a sequence, and then you want to predict which residues will paired with each other. So there is a method called end-to-end fold, which first input the sequence into a highly expressive module such as transformer and convolution to encode more complicated dependency of this sequence. And then they will have a reasoning module which contains an unrolled algorithm for solving a constraint optimization to decode the output structure of the RNA sequence. So this reasoning module as a constraint optimization solver will be able to enforce the constraints to restrict the output space. So to conclude, we are interested in this type of hybrid architecture, and we want to ask some questions like, different algorithms can solve the same reasoning tasks. So when we design this reasoning module, how will different algorithms be different from each other when they are used as a reasoning layer in the deep architecture? And as we know that in many traditional areas, there are a lot of theoretical analysis that tells us about the algorithm properties, such as the convergence, stability, and sensitivity of those traditional algorithms. So we want to know that how these algorithm properties will relate or affect the generalization and representation ability of the end-to-end hybrid architecture. So to answer this question, we perform theoretical analysis based on a more simplified setting. In this setting, the neural module is an energy function, and this energy function is required to be projected in Y. However, it can be very complicated. It can be a very complicated function in the input X. For example, in this example, the Q can be a neural network which has complex dependency on the input X, but the overall energy function need to be projected in Y. And then with this neural energy, we will have an optimization algorithm, which is an unrolled optimization algorithm that computes, that approximate the optimizer, the minimizer of this energy function. So given n many input-output pairs, we will train this hybrid model end to end, and without the intermediate supervision on the energy E. So based on this setting, we would like to ask some questions like, for example, we have optimization algorithms such as gradient descent and Nesterov accelerated gradient. So we want to know if we use gradient descent and Nesterov as the reasoning layer, so how will they be different from each other? For example, traditionally, we know that gradient descent and Nesterov are different from each other in terms of their algorithm properties. For example, we can see that we know that Nesterov converges faster than gradient descent, and gradient descent is more stable than Nesterov. And also Nesterov is less sensitive than gradient descent. So given these algorithm properties, we want to know that how will they be different from each other when they are used in a deep architecture. And the next question is whether it will always be better if we use more iterations. Because we are using unrolled, we usually unroll an algorithm and truncate it to a finite number of iterations and use it as a reasoning module. So we want to know whether it is always better if this algorithm has been unrolled for more steps. So if we unroll the algorithm for infinite many steps, it will lead to an equilibrium model. And will it always be a better choice than a finite number of iterations K? So to answer these questions, we perform a theoretical analysis, and this is our main theorem. So in this theorem, we bound the local random markup complexity of the hybrid architecture. So the left-hand side of this theorem is the local random markup complexity of the end-to-end model. And on the right-hand side, we can see that this local random markup complexity can be bounded by something that is related to the algorithm properties. So both stability and convergence and also sensitivity will affect the generalization ability of the end-to-end model. And in the right-hand side, the C1, C2, C3 are the complexity of the neural module. So we can see that how the algorithm properties and also how the complexity of the neural module kick into the bound, the generalization bound for the end-to-end model. And to explain the theorem, we now present several implications from the theorem. The first implication is that we can, when the C1, C2, and C3 are very large or very small in the bound, it corresponds to the case when the neural module is over-parametrized or under-parametrized. And our theorem tells that in these two cases, the generalization bound will be dominated by the stability of the algorithm. So that means that when we use more iterations, when we use more unrolled iterations of the optimization algorithm, it will lead to worse generalization because the stability of an algorithm will increase. It means that it gets worse when we use more iterations. And for a fixed number of iterations, K, gradient descent is expected to be generalized better than Nesterov accelerative gradient because gradient descent is more stable. And the second implication is that when C1, C2, and C3 are not too large or small, which means that the neural module has an about right parametrization, we can see from our theorem that the generalization bound will be dominated by the stability multiply the convergence, which is different from the last case when the generalization bound is only dominated by the stability. So when the convergence also has an effect to the generalization, we can see that the convergence, the generalization bound will be will behave like the third image in this slide, as the product of the convergence and stability. And in this case, it will have different behavior because we can see that when K becomes larger, we can expect a better generalization because when K is larger, the convergence will make the product smaller. And also in this case, the Nesterov will be expected to generalize better than gradient descent. And finally, I will just show some experimental results, which shows that the observation from the experimental result align well with our theory, because the dimension here shows how many hidden layer, the dimension of the hidden layer that we use for the neural module, and it should correspond to the over-parametrized, about right parametrized, and under-parametrized, the three cases. And we can see that for the under-parametrized and over-parametrized case, the behavior is similar to the stability of the algorithm. And for the about right parametrization case, when the dimension is 16, the behavior is more similar to the product of the convergence and stability. So that's all for my brief introductions. If you are interested in more details, please feel free to contact me and ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see. Okay, so if we don't get a question from the audience, let me just ask one question. I have been always interested in this regime. So my one question is perhaps, so now you are using a quadratic optimization as an example of the reasoning modular, which you have convex and you got the benefit of proof of convergence using functional values. What if your reasoning modular is a non-convex one, which more commonly we prove from a gradient value convergence? So how it will affect your proof? Just a broad question. Thank you.
Okay, so we need the convexity in our paper mainly for two reasons. The first one is that we want the output, we want the ground truth to be unique, because we assume the ground truth is the optimizer of an unknown energy function. So having the convexity help us to get a unique ground truth. So in the case when it is non-convex, then we may need to have another way to measure the distance between your estimation and the ground truth label. And the other thing is that we need it to be convex so that we have the inverse stability. That means the mapping from the mapping from the solution to the energy function should be stable. So we need this property to derive the bound. So without the convexity, if we can make some assumption about the stability of the mapping from the solution back to the energy function, it will be also fine, I guess.
Got you. Okay, inversibility. Okay, interesting point. Thank you very much. And thank you for this great talk. Thank you. Okay, so